So we're not going to get much past chapter 4 today, but I think this will be a meaningful conversation. And Minister Joe is going to start us looking at Genesis 2, actually, so we get just a little background on the trees.
So 15 through 17 says, the Lord God took the man and put in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that you eat of it you shall die.
And let me say this before you get rolling, Minister Joe. This phrase here, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is actually a little more awkward in the original Hebrew than the English makes it look. It seems to say in Hebrew, but the tree of knowledge, and then kind of as an aside, good and evil, you shall not eat. So I just want to say this. Good and evil in Hebrew they're experiential terms, what we might call existential terms. They're not philosophical or conceptual, meaning that it's not as though this tree contains the concept of good and the concept of evil. And they're going to learn conceptually what is good and what is bad if they eat from it or something like that. Good and evil are existential terms in Hebrew, meaning that it's about how you experience them. So good is positive. You experience this positively. Evil is destructive. You experience it in negative ways. So what it means is that this tree contains both helpful knowledge and hurtful knowledge. That's what it means by good and evil. So this tree, the knowledge it contains can both help and hurt. So that's the sense of it. So that's just a little Hebrew background. I know for English speakers, especially Western thinkers like we are, good and evil tend to be concepts. We tend to think of evil as bad things and good as good things. And we're usually thinking in moral terms, like morally good and morally bad. And this tree contains moral knowledge. That's how a lot of Western thinkers have read it. I just want to insist that that's not the nature really of the Hebrew. These are more experiential. So when we discovered the atom bomb, that you could actually split an atom and release a chain reaction of energy, when we discovered that has its positive aspects, like powering nuclear power plants, or I had nuclear medicine. Submarines, things like that. But it also has its negative, which we see when it's used as a weapon and a bomb. That's the kind of knowledge we're talking about here. It has its positive and its negative benefits. So I just want to make that somewhat clear that these are not Greek people who wrote this. It's not philosophical, moral terms necessarily. Evil, you can experience something that's morally fine as evil if it hurts you. So like friction is a morally good thing to have. Well, maybe it's not moral. It's a good thing to have. Friction, I mean, you know how much depends on friction? You couldn't even drive your car if there was no friction. You and I wouldn't be able to walk if there was no friction. It's generally good. But if you hit a pavement at high speed, friction becomes evil, right? But that's because you're experiencing the negative side effects of it. That's what we're usually talking about when good and evil are used in the scriptures, which is why the Bible doesn't have a problem in the original Hebrew saying that God does an evil thing. It doesn't mean that God is doing something that's morally wrong. It just means he's doing something that causes harm to somebody. Like he brings evil, it says in Genesis, on Sodom and Gomorrah. That doesn't mean God is doing something wrong. It just means that bad effects are coming down on the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's evil for them. Even though it's morally good, it's still experientially evil. And your children probably think you do evil to them when you discipline them. And that's a good Hebraic way of using the word. But you're not, well, some parents maybe are doing moral evil when they discipline their kids. It depends on how they do it. But for parents who love their children, it's not morally evil, though the children experience it as harm. So I just wanted to say that, and I'm sorry to have, I just want to put that on the table.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting that in this chapter it's that the Lord took man and put him in the garden to till it and to work in it, and it's like oftentimes we think of work as harsh labor or difficult or painful, but there seems to be a positive aspect of it here where it's actually man's job is to care for it, to take care of creation, and it seems like a pretty simple task to keep from eating of this one tree, but again that it's a supreme test, because I tend to feel like there's a little bit more going on here than just eating this fruit. I think it's actually gives the essence of the idea that I want to do it my way kind of mentality, that it's more of a the opportunity to do it in a way that is controlling or God-like. That to make that choice is something I think people probably need to hear more about, because they often think of it just as you said earlier about it just being some type of knowledge, like they need to know good from evil, but those things are discerned through experience and
the emphasis on this tree is though on the knowledge, because good and evil, you won't have any question. Hebrew understanding of good and evil, you won't have any question. Like if an atom bomb is dropped on your house, evil, you're experiencing that as evil. You're not going to have a debate over whether that was a good experience or a bad experience. You're going to say that's a bad experience for you. So good and evil is just a consequential understanding. The point is the knowledge. The point is that it's the tree of knowledge. And you and I talked about this before. Is the Bible, therefore, against knowledge? And you and I both agreed it's not. But we have to explain why not? What's the problem then with eating from a tree full of knowledge?
Well, that's the thing. Knowledge means other things, I think, in the scriptures as well. I mean, to know something is to experience it and intimately understand it. There's other more to that. I mean, it says that probably inappropriate comment here, but like Adam, his wife, and they had a child. There's a degree of more than just knowing who they are or what they are. They've actually have been able to connect in such a way that they understand things. So I think what can be displayed here is this ability to know the consequence of what this can do for you, like such as the atom bomb being used as a weapon, as opposed to something that could be used to fuel or make heat or propel a vehicle or that kind of thing.
Well, and we have to recognize there are three words in Hebrew, three conceptual terms for what we would call knowledge. So there's B'nai, which means understanding. There's Chokmah, which means wisdom. And there's Da'at, which means knowledge. And this is not the tree of Chokmah. It's not the tree of wisdom. It's not the tree of B'nai. It's not the tree of understanding. It's a tree of Da'at, knowledge. And Da'at is, as you're saying, you got this right, very experiential. So it's also not simply a tree about all kinds of things that we would consider knowledge. Like I said, it's not a tree of wisdom. Wisdom in the scriptures comes from God and from knowledge of him. So the tree of knowledge is not a tree of all knowing. It's a specific kind of knowing that's housed in this tree. It's da'at. And you and I are having too brief a conversation to get into the wide range of difference between these three terms, but I'll summarize it really quickly. Well, and there's debate about this. I talked with a Jewish friend just recently, maybe in the last year, who convinced me that B'nai, understanding, is the highest form of knowing in Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard that. I thought wisdom, Chokmah, was. And I'm going to stick with what I thought I knew, because his idea was so new to me. And I ran it across a few other friends, including one who is Jewish also, but is a Christian, and he disagreed with him. So, these aren't hard and fast. But
Yeah.
Da'at is sort of a raw type of knowledge. It's experiential knowledge. It's the kind of knowledge that you get by seeing how things work. Chokmah is wisdom. It's knowing when a certain type of knowledge should be used and when it shouldn't. So it's
That's
about knowing.
That's like discernment then.
Yeah, well,
Discerning.
no, discernment is B'nai. So maybe I should have done B'nai first. B'nai is more discernment, being able to tell the difference between good knowledge and bad knowledge. So I always think of Jeff Goldblum's line in the first Jurassic Park movie, when he says, "You were so interested to see whether you could, you didn't stop to think if you should."
Mm.
That's B'nai. That's kind of, that's discernment. So Da'at is kind of this experiential knowledge that, like, scientists are doing a lot with Da'at. They're experimenting. They're trying to see how things work. That's what they're doing with this virus right now, because we're in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown. They're seeking Da'at. They're experimenting, seeing what will kill it, what won't, trying to see if they can make a vaccine. That's Da'at, right? B'nai is like discernment. It's being able to tell whether you should pursue a line of thought or not, whether this is useful. It's kind of what we want our kids to have when they are trying to decide if they should follow the crowd and drink, or maybe get involved in activities they shouldn't. We want them to have B'nai. We want them to have some sort of discernment as to good knowledge and bad knowledge, or helpful and hurtful. We want them to have B'nai. Wisdom is different, though. Wisdom, Chokmah, is knowing, because some knowledge is only good or bad based on the circumstance. Like sometimes this is the right time. So Chokmah is described like in the book of Ecclesiastes, where it says there's a time for everything under the sun. There's a time for mourning and there's a time for rejoicing. There's a time for living and a time for dying. There's a time for gathering and a time for sowing. Wisdom knows what time it is. Mm-hmm. So this tree, if you had to bring it to today, you would say Da'at is the Enlightenment's passion. Experimental, experiential knowledge of how things work. And that's what this tree is. But it's not a tree of B'nai, of discernment, and it's not a tree of wisdom, Chokmah. So the knowledge that's gained from this tree, we wouldn't know when to use it, and we wouldn't know instinctively if it's good or bad to use. And you can see this in history. For instance, I know this is a controversial subject on whether all the carbon fuel that we've been burning is affecting the climate, whether global climate change is human-induced or we're going through some sort of a pattern. So I don't want to get into that. At the very least, we can say that burning fossil fuels has caused a lot of pollution that has plagued a lot of cities. We can certainly see it in China. You can see the smog in places in California, which is a feature of the terrain as well, but also no doubt because of the noxious things we're putting into the environment. So acid rain, things like that we've talked about for years and years and years. So we didn't know when we first started to burn. Now, we got some Da'at of fossil fuels. You can burn them and they release an enormous amount of energy. So that's Da'at. But we didn't know whether doing that was going to cause problems or if all the benefits were positive. We didn't have B'nai. We didn't have discernment on that. And we started burning them and burning them and burning them and burning them. And then afterwards you see, oh my, we're causing a lot of pollution. People are getting sick. And so now we're getting B'nai, but after the Da'at, right? We're getting some discernment, but now we don't know what to do because we kind of ran ahead. So when you get Da'at before you have B'nai, and when you don't have Chokmah, bad things happen. But if if knowledge is acquired by someone with discernment, and who has acquired wisdom, then da'at can really do some positive things. So I wanted to make those distinctions to just recognize this is not a tree of all knowing. It's a tree of da'at. And it's a tree in which you can receive da'at, no matter how mature or immature you are, whether you have b'nai, whether you have discernment or not, whether you have hokmah or not. This is a tree that you can simply seize knowledge from, da'at. So that's, sorry for the long Hebrew thing. But it's important to know what we're dealing with these things, because in English it says the tree of knowledge. It sounds like it's the tree of all knowing.
Yeah.
But it's not all knowing, it's only da'at.
The golden fruit of the Chronicles of Narnia, or the perfect apple.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you and I, so it's important for us to know that that's kind of what's at stake. And well, I'm going to let you respond to some of that, because I obviously have more to say, but that would be unfair.
Well, it's obvious that it wouldn't become such a big issue until the temptation has come. But the whole idea that God says to him, "Don't eat from it, because if you do, you will certainly die." That's when it becomes even more problematic for people to understand what that means, because they think oftentimes that to die means that there's a physical death. In this circumstances, there's something that happens differently.
Right.
That we'll talk about in the next chapter. But the reality is that it's put out front there. It's not a hidden or mysterious thing.
Right. Did you have more to say on that?
I think we're pretty good on that for now.
Okay.
I mean, we can start to talk about
the other
that.
thing I wanted to kind of say about this, again, I know this is controversial for some people. People get caught up, before we get into the actual fall, they get caught up with whether this is history or whether this is myth. And I've continued to say that I think it is history, but I think it is a summarized history. Mm-hmm. I imagine that this was much more complicated than the way that the story is told to us. But I think God, as he inspired Moses, he wants to present the story in a way that it's accessible to us and we can understand what was happening. And so I think that this is the best way to explain what occurred. Mm-hmm. But we have to be careful, because I'm sure that these two trees are summaries of some sort. Not metaphors, not myths. I think they're real, substantial things, but they're summarized. Mm-hmm. Like, I imagine that eating from the tree of knowledge was probably a little more complicated than plucking a piece of fruit. Mm-hmm. And I imagine, based on the way the story goes, you and I now know what it means to take from the tree of life, and it means to put faith in Jesus. Mm-hmm. So that's much more complicated than simply plucking a fruit and eating it. So these trees are summaries of these realities, but they are realities. Mm-hmm. There really was a garden. There really was a choice. And there really were trees, though the trees, I think, are summaries. And so in order to say it that way, if we get caught up the way Ponce de Leon did on the fountain of life, if we get caught up in trying to find a physical, material fountain, we're going to miss the reality that the fountain of life is always with us. That life it's not about finding some particular location in the jungle. It's about understanding what the fountain of life is. And so for us, we are barred from the tree of life by the cherubim. That's what's going to happen because of the events we haven't yet discussed, but the people have read. But we're not barred from the tree of knowledge. And the idea that this tree only exists in the garden will really shut us off from understanding the whole trajectory of Scripture. The tree of knowledge is still with us. Our access to it has not been blocked. We've been blocked from the tree of life. And we now know that no one can come to the tree of life unless they have faith in Jesus. There is a limitation. No one has free access. But the narrative of Genesis still seems to imply that God did not intend to block all access to the tree of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's important to recognize that. And if you get caught up with the historical moment, you're going to think that there's no risk you could eat from the tree of knowledge today.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be foolish, because humanity has never stopped eating from the tree of knowledge. Never.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure that that is starting to be clear, especially for our people, because again, it's always history, but it is also contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the important thing. I'll show you this just so that anybody who's double checking my Hebrew. This is Genesis 2:17, and this says umeetz, and from the tree hada'at of knowledge, tov, good, vara, and evil, you shall never eat from it.
Mm-hmm.
So because on the day you eat from it, mimanu mot tamut, you will most certainly die. This is a strong, strong way of saying it. God is not saying, though it looks like Eve understands this as meaning later that the tree is poisonous or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's not the way that mimanu mot tamut, God is saying he will execute them. Mm-hmm. This is a threat of execution, not a threat of contagion. Mm-hmm. It's not a warning that the tree is poisonous, so be careful. It's a threat. And that phrase is part of why Jesus died on the cross. Mm. Because God always keeps his word. He is a God of love, of chesed, which means he's loyal to his word. So Jesus actually fulfills that on the cross for Gentiles, well, and Jews too, but the Jewish people had to be saved from more than just this. But anyway, let's move into chapter 3.
Yeah.
And as we do, I'll just simply say this. Well, I'll ask you, Minister Joe, why not put you on the chopping block?
Sure, yeah.
Tell me about your impressions of this serpent. This is its first appearance in the story in chapter 3. I mean, we run right into it. Chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made.
More crafty, yeah. Yeah, we often associate the serpent with the should we say the personification of Satan or the devil, which is interesting because I mean Lucifer or the devil, Lucifer when he was an angel, is that correct? That's right. And
well, the scriptures don't tell us the story of Satan's origins, so we don't know if he was ever an angel. But Christian history does assign him that role originally. A very particular reading of Isaiah chapter 14, which is about Nebuchadnezzar in context, has been read as also the prehistory of Satan. And Ezekiel 36, which is about the cities of Tyre and Sidon, others have also read that as a history of Satan. And so they've put those things together and created a prehistory and have said that he was one of 3 archangels and all of that. That is all summarized in a poem by John Milton called Paradise Lost. And most of what most people think they know about Satan comes from that poem, which is kind of bringing together the mythology of the medieval church. So maybe they're right. Maybe their guesses are right. But we don't know that they are.
Mhm.
In the scriptural record, the first occurrence of who will eventually be revealed as Satan is the serpent
Mhm.
here in Genesis 3. So this is his first. And I often joke around. People will say, well, where did he come from? And I'll say, well, I don't know, because my Bible begins with Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I don't know what happened before that. I don't have any stories. But some people think that God is revealing prehistory through these condemnations of human rulers. He's revealing the prehistory of the spiritual force behind those rulers. Some people believe that. That would be Isaiah 15, Ezekiel 36, and a few other places. But
Mhm.
I don't know. That could be. I don't have any reason to believe it couldn't be, but it doesn't have to be. So I
Mhm.
like to start my conversation about who Satan is right here in Genesis 3:1, where the Bible starts
Mhm.
with him. So I don't get into
Right.
the prehistory stuff. The Bible does say he pretends to be an angel of light.
Mhm.
That's in the New Testament, but that is, of course, he's pretending. I
Mhm.
don't know what he really is. You know,
Right. Well, definitely here he's crafty.
he's crafty, but do you see the comparison?
Yeah.
He's crafty compared to the
The
wild
wild.
animals,
Wild
not
animals.
compared to
Yeah.
humans.
Right.
That's a specific group of animals. The word for
Yeah.
serpent is nachash, and it's a fairly rare one um, in the First Testament. There is another word for snake that sometimes is used. And this one has a definite article. So it's the Nachash.
Mhm.
But it does, I don't know, it occurs. I'll give you a little window. 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 2.
Mhm.
David is dealing with somebody who is the son of Nachash, which literally translated is the son of the serpent.
Mhm.
It's an interesting, I don't know who Nachash was or why people were naming anybody after the serpent, but that
Mhm.
happens in 2 Samuel 10:2. So, you've got some interesting things like that. And Nachash is the preferred word for serpent in the prophets.
Mhm.
So, it's got an interesting history. But the book of Revelation makes it really clear
Mhm.
that this figure
Mhm.
is the one that the New Testament calls the Satan or the devil,
Mhm.
that it's the same. So I hesitate to say that this is a possessed creature. I think this is the serpent.
Mhm.
Like I have a hard time believing that this is talking about just simply being possessed. In fact, if you just take Genesis at face value, there's no reason to believe that the serpent wasn't created with the other animals on day 6.
Mhm.
Now, you can argue that that can't be because he has some special privileges, and you can get into it. It's also interesting that there is a pretty large segments of Judaism that don't even believe that there is such a thing as Satan. They think of the serpent as just a creature that deceived. Now, of course, there are plenty of Jewish people who do believe in Satan because of Job
Mhm.
and a few other passages. But I think it's most natural to take this at face value, not to think of this as some possessed animal or something like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but to think of this as the serpent.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly not another human being or even uh, anything that even looked like a human being. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's like you think that the temptation would be with, I mean, you think of a snake, what would be attractive at all about that? It would, but,
Yeah, snakes have well,
mesmerizing.
where Abraham came from, Sumeria.
Mm-hmm.
He came from Ur, which is part of Sumeria. Sumeria had a creation story in which they claim that a higher god was trying to enslave them, and another god who took the form of a snake brought them knowledge and freed them from the tyranny of the other god and helped them set up their society.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a snake like this. So this idea of the serpent and the role the serpent played in the beginning is all through the Middle East in the days of Abraham. So it's an important metaphor. In the Sumerian story, he walks upright like a man, but he's serpentine in terms of his look. We don't get much here, but this serpent is going to lose its legs. So I don't know what it looked like, but it's not like the snakes you and I see at first anyway.
A centipede, maybe.
I like to call it Nachash. Yeah. And interestingly enough, and this might be an argument for what you were saying with the angelic origins, the seraphim that's the other word for snake, seraph. And so seraphim are snake-like too, but this is a different word. This is Nachash. So there is some angelic connection with the serpentine. I don't know why, but that's in the Bible. That's beyond my knowledge. So I don't have good access to the tree of Da'at to discern that. So anyway, sorry to interrupt there, but I guess all of that was because we started saying that maybe this was an angel or Satan who was possessing the creature. And you could be right. I just wanted to put out my opinion that I like to just take this at face value. This is
I mean, there's no reason to think that that it wasn't a serpent. I think that it goes into detail of talking about being more crafty than the other wild animals that God created or had made. And so I think it's pretty straightforward there, but it's really not metaphorical, I don't think.
No, it's a real creature. He interacted and he comes up in the Job story, he comes up in the prophets, and he encounters Jesus. He's warned about by the New Testament writers, and he's a figure in the book of Revelation. So as far as I can tell, if you're going to read the Bible squarely, this is a real creature. We don't know a lot about him, but that doesn't mean he's real. Right.
And that probably had to be something that could, you always see the pictures of the serpent hanging down from the tree, and it's all up in the tree of much in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so it gives you, those are all the imageries that come to the mind.
Yeah, he's always filmed as basically a large snake. Almost always filmed that way. I remember do you remember that old movie, The Bible? That eventually, when it comes to the Abraham part of that movie, it starred George C. Scott as Abraham. Do you remember that? John Huston was Noah. In that particular movie, when they showed the serpent, he was very serpentine and snake-like. He was in the tree, but you could see he had arms that he was kind of holding above him. So they tried to play that he was some sort of the real point of the story here. And remember, I believe this is history, but it also has to be told in a way that we can understand. There are 4 categories of land creatures created. Humans are on top, then the wild animals, who are kind of just below humans. Then there's livestock, which are beneath them, and then there are the creatures that crawl on the ground. Those are the 4 categories, the lowest being the creatures that crawl on the ground, the highest being humans. That's kind of the hierarchy that's described. This creature is the craftiest of the wild animals. So in terms of his da'at, he's just below humans, is the way. And then when he's cursed and he loses his legs, he becomes a creature that crawls on the ground, which puts him in the lowest. So he gets demoted. That's the point of the way the story's told. He gets demoted. And that's the point of the loss of his legs. Now, who knows what actually happened, but that's what happened meant.
Right.
He gets demoted. So at this point in the story, we are set up to believe, if we're good readers of the Hebrew of Genesis 1 and 2, we recognize that of all the animal world that lies beneath humans, this creature is at the top of it. So he stands above the rest of the animal world, but below humans. He's not the craftiest of all the things God made. He's the craftiest of the wild animals God had made. He's the craftiest of the highest tier of animal. So, and he's Nachash, he's a serpent. So
yeah, so the idea is what does crafty mean, really? Because does that mean, because it's like my wife's crafty, she can make all kinds of things and arrange things and make things look beautiful, but in this context, it seems like it's more like more manipulative or more controlling or more.
Yeah, it's all in how you use it. It's all in how you use it. So this is the word here in Hebrew. It's arum. That's his crafty. And it's translated, you can see that this is the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon of the Hebrew of the Old Testament, the First Testament. Crafty, shrewd, or sensible. It's used of the serpent. You can see that in there. It means to do something with good sense, shrewd or a sensible person, a prudent person. It's not negative, inherently negative. It's all in how you use it. So it's a room. But you're right. He's using this to deceive. But it's not an inherently evil type of sensibility. It can be used, and it does occur in the scriptures positively. Jesus even says, be as crafty as serpents, but as innocent as doves to his disciples.
Right.
Calling back
and
to
I think people probably are stunned by that, and they think like, what?
Yeah, because it's not an inherently negative thing. And you know this, right? There, sometimes I get it. I laugh, not haha, but in a sad sort of mournful laugh when they follow people, and when you say, well, why do you trust him? And they say, well, he's so smart. And I think, what? What does that have anything to do with being trustworthy? Smarts can be used for good or for evil. The serpent used a room for evil. His craftiness for evil here. It can be used for good, but the fact that you have a room, that you're kind of a savvy person, doesn't mean anything about your trustworthiness. You can be brilliant and evil.
Right. That's right.
A tree's known by its fruit, not by its arum.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so it has to do with we would call it street smarts. Maybe somebody who can figure things out. So do you notice that this story is all full of knowing? The tree is of Da'at. The serpent has a room. We're wondering where Chokmah B'nai would figure in. It's all kinds of heady stuff.
Then comes the question: did God really say? Did he really say?
Yeah, and it's a bit of a distortion, right? Do you have a sense of why this is asked to the woman? If you're paying attention to the story as it unfolds, the command to not eat was given to Adam before woman was created. Now, there's a sense that she's in him because God removes a rib and forms a woman. He actually takes the human and divides him in half. So you might argue that the knowledge of what Adam knew was retained in this separated creation of woman. You could maybe argue that. But the way the narrative goes, Adam is the one given this command. And it is interesting that the serpent questions not Adam, who heard the command directly from God, but the woman. And you could say, well, maybe God told her too. Okay, but the story doesn't say that. The story doesn't actually tell us at all how she got this information. We could just as easily assume Adam told her.
Right.
As God did. But the serpent goes after the one who did not receive the direct revelation. I think that's important. And so did God really say that you can't eat from any of these trees? Which is an interesting lead-in, because he knows that God didn't say that. She knows God didn't say that. So the question is, why does he ask? We know God didn't say that. It's a stupid question. But he's
right.
crafty. We're already told he's crafty, so it's not a stupid question. Why does he ask it?
Yeah, he's leading her. Wants to get her get her to explain it. To see if she owns it.
And he's suggesting that God is unreasonable. I wouldn't be surprised if God told you not to eat anything. You and I have been in this situation with friends who wanted us to do something we knew we shouldn't do. And they said something like, well, you're not allowed to do anything. And you're like, well, I'm allowed to do some things. I just don't want to do that thing,
Right.
but that's how the tax it's still the way people, they'll make it sound like if you say no to something that you say no to everything.
Mm-hmm.
We've had this a little bit with this lockdown, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're following the government edicts. And so you'll find memes of people saying, hey, if you follow the government edicts, then you're just like a Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like a Nazi sympathizer who didn't question the hiding of Jews. And you're like, well, I'm not going to obey everything. I'm just obeying this thing.
Right. Right.
Certainly not going to get involved in genocide. But that's the same thing the serpent does. He puts it in an extreme form that questions both her and the one who gave her the law.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't directly question them. It would be kind of like saying, so did God really say you have to obey everything the government says?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd say, well, no, not everything.
Right.
But most things. It's the same conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can learn Satan's tact. That's how Satan starts.
Mm-hmm.
Even humans speaking in his name start the same way.
Yeah. Well, that's the same thing with Jesus being tempted in Matthew 4. There's parallel, right?
There is, yeah.
So the woman says, we may eat from the fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. You must not even touch it or you will die.
Yeah, so it's clear to me she's misunderstood the nature of this fruit because God didn't say they couldn't touch it, right? But this might reveal how she understood the law, that there was something dangerous about the fruit. And that like I said, I pointed this out in chapter 2, that's not actually the way it's phrased. It's actually the danger is God, not the fruit. But she's interpreted the danger as being inherent in the fruit. Now she's in error about that. And that's important because it's what we don't know about what God has said where we are most vulnerable. So this is a vulnerability for her. She doesn't really understand the law of God. And because she doesn't understand it, she misrepresents it. And it's the misrepresentation that Satan attacks. Not the actual thing God said. He just attacks her misinterpretation of it. And that is where she's vulnerable. And it's where we're all vulnerable. Forever. Right. What God says is perfect, but how we've understood it is our vulnerability. And that's Satan.
He cuts it right to it, right? In verse 5, it says, God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good from evil. So he takes it totally off. So if somebody tells you, I'm gonna kill you if you do this, that's got no answer at all to what no comparison to what he's saying here.
Yep.
You'll know good from evil. I mean, if somebody says they're gonna kill you if you cross this line, it's a big difference.
There is a big difference. Yeah. And I don't how deep into the Hebrew to go. I don't know. Maybe this isn't very helpful. But I want to say this. So what he is suggesting. So this is the tree of knowledge, da'at. It comes from the word yada, which means to know. So like when Adam knew his wife, you mentioned that earlier. That's from the same word as da'at. Da'at is the noun. Yada is the verb. So this is the tree of da'at. And what the serpent says is, Elohim yadas. Elohim knows. that on the day that you eat from this tree, your eyes will open and you will know, like God knows, all that is good, all that is evil, meaning you will know all that helps and all that hurts. You will have the yada of God. Not the Chokmah, not the wisdom of God, not the B'nai, not the discernment of God, not even the Arum, not even the craftiness of the serpent. You won't get any of that from this tree. He doesn't even offer it. What you will get is Da'at. You will begin to experience good and bad. And that is what God doesn't want to happen. And he is right. He's right. God doesn't want that to happen in this way. He's not lying. So why does it work? She already knew God didn't want her to have it. What did he say that made it work? And I think it was, and you can respond to this, I think it was, she thought the tree was dangerous. But now to find out that there's nothing dangerous in the tree, it's simply the da'at that God is trying to prevent them from acquiring. That changed the game for her. She thought the law was protecting her, but the serpent suggests it was limiting her. And that changes the game for Eve. It's one thing to be protected from dangerous things. It's another thing to be limited. And the serpent, he tells the complete truth. There's no half-truth here. The only, well, there is a half-truth. You won't die. You will not certainly die. But he's not wrong about that either. Because does he understand that God is merciful and won't execute them immediately? Like, this is the thing. He says you will not certainly die. And he's not wrong about that either. Because we ate from this tree and some of us can live forever if we have faith in Jesus. So he's right. You won't certainly die. He's right. So the problem with the serpent is that there's too much truth to tell the deception. And here we have to learn from this story. And I'll let you respond. I'm sorry I keep talking so much. We have to learn from this story that someone can tell you the truth and deceive you. You can be deceived by the truth. It does not take a lie to deceive. And this is a lesson that is delivered to us in chapter 3 of Genesis. And it changes the game for the whole rest of the story. You can be set free by the truth, but you can also be deceived by the truth. And what matters is in whose mouth the truth resides. In the mouth of the serpent, that truth will be used to enslave you. In the mouth of Jesus, it'll be used to set you free. But it's not the truth. Some people eat from the tree of knowledge because they're seeking truth, and they think by the truth they will be saved. But who is teaching you the truth? That's the difference. That's the difference. Some will use truth to enslave, and the serpent certainly does. There's nothing he said here you couldn't argue was true. But the way he put it was a lie. He insinuates without saying that God is afraid of them, wanting to limit them, does not have their best interest at heart, really has his own best interest at heart. That's what he's insinuating, and those are lies. But everything else he says is true, and the lies are only insinuated. They're not overtly spoken. So he is crafty. And you and I have met people like this.
Some people use scripture and we'll tell you, well, this is what the scripture says. This is what you should do. You're like, well, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know. Something feels off about that. But, if the person's smart enough and they have enough degrees, you think, well, maybe.
Mm.
We should be learning all this in this COVID-19 time, right? Because if you've really been paying attention, the recommendations from the people in power have changed, several times. And it's not surprising. We don't know what we're dealing with here. It's no wonder that we change our minds. But it's the absolute certainty of each opinion that then gets changed that is so irritating. We realize that if people want to deceive, the best way to do it is with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the serpent knows that. Serpent will not lie to you. Like trying to discern, we're talking about reading this book, Hearing God,
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to discern God's voice speaking to us amongst all the other voices. When the serpent's voice is speaking to us, he's not going to lie. That would be too easy. You'd spot a lie. Con men know this. You can't overtly lie, at least not in anything anyone could check.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to tell you the truth, but he's going to insinuate that your response to the truth should be other than it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the craftiness of our adversary. And so Jesus says he's a liar, and he is, but he's not the kind of liar you and I can spot.
Mm-hmm.
He's crafty. And so he deceives her with the truth. Mm-hmm. And he exposes her ignorance. He uses her ignorance of God's law to create a hole for his insinuations. Mm-hmm. And she swallows it hook, line, and sinker. Mm-hmm. Because he hasn't said anything God didn't say. He impugns God's motives, not God's words. Mm-hmm. And so she swallows it. He's persuasive to her, which is astounding, right? Because she and Adam met God. Mm-hmm. Like they walk with him in the cool of the day. It's astounding. The serpent was persuasive. What do you think it was about their relationship with God that made them believe this?
It just seems like there's always that small element within us all that makes us question that even our own desire to try to control things for ourselves that I think is I kind of backfeeding it from my own personal experience. So, right. It's like you're in paradise, and yet you're doing the things that you say you want to do, but there's a small begging question there that wants to breed a discontent.
Yeah.
And it can happen anywhere you are or anything you're doing. You could be having the best time in the world or thinking things are going well, and then all of a sudden, boom, out of nowhere, that's where I find there's a similarity here, where it's the breeding of discontent begins to build, and then it leads to a road where you do something you regret, I should say.
If you've had children, you've seen this more times than you can probably explain. Mm-hmm. If you've had children and they want to know something, you don't think they're ready to know it. And you say, well, we'll have that conversation when you're a little bit older. But then they meet a friend who already has that information or thinks he or she does. And they say, hey, I could tell you about this. Mm-hmm. Are you going to listen to your parents? My experience is that they probably had enough experience with God to know he wasn't telling them things. Mm-hmm. That there were things he knew that they didn't know. It doesn't take long. My kids figured this out when they were really little, that I had information they didn't have. And they began to work to get it out of me. Even today, mm-hmm. if they hear Jen and I talking about something privately and they kind of come in and I'll say, give us some privacy, they'll say, what are you talking about? And I'll say, well, it's between mommy and daddy. It's not for you. And then they'll keep interrogating. They want to know what it is that we know that they don't know. It drives them crazy to not have all the information. And I imagine that Adam and Eve had enough experience with God that they knew, just like our children know, that there are things we're not telling them. And this serpent comes in like a friend from outside who offers us a way to get the information that is being kept from us. That's the tree of knowledge. It's the information being kept from us.
And there seems to be those in our society right now that are promoting that.
That's what conspiracy theories are. They're the same thing. And when I say that, I don't say it derisively. There are conspiracies in the world. So some of the theories are right. We have historical evidence of some conspiracies that were right. Like for the British, when there was rumor that America might revolt, at first I'm sure it was just a conspiracy. And there were a few people in England going, they'll never do that. That's just a conspiracy theory. But of course, that conspiracy was true. And the Americans did revolt. So I'm not saying it derisively, but conspiracy theories feed that part of us that says people know things and they're not telling us. How can I get to know what they know? And it can become this passion. It's the same thing, I think, that the Satan was able to target in Adam and Eve. Same kind of a thirst to know. What do you know that I don't know? Minister Joe, what do you know that I don't know?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of who we are, though, in some ways. That there's that when I say we are, I just think there's that element within us where we think we need to know everything.
Yeah.
Tell me everything now.
But the thing is, knowledge is not. I mean, as we move through the scriptures, God teaches his people. The law is a type of knowledge that's given to humanity, and God is the one who delivers it. The search for wisdom is all through the wisdom literature of the First Testament. And Jesus does nothing but teach. So it's not as though God is opposed to educating us, but God is more like a teacher, more like a parent who wants to make sure that there's sufficient maturity for the information being given. But Satan and the tree of knowledge is like your neighbor next door who can't wait to talk to you about something he doesn't even understand. Like he's like a kid working in some sort of chemical shop that just wants to see what happens if I mix this and this. And if it blows up the house, whatever. It's just kind of this, he's like a mad scientist. And God is not opposed to us learning, but like I said, God doesn't give us da'at without b'nai hakma, right? Without discernment and wisdom. God tries to bring, it's what teachers do when they talk about graded curriculum, only giving students information they're ready for when they're ready for it. Because information given at the wrong time can sometimes have devastating effects, which we see when kids are molested, for instance. That is a type of information that they should not be receiving. But it's given to them at the wrong time and it devastates their lives. What we have in Satan and in our own hubris as humans is a rush to know, irrespective of whether we're ready for the knowledge. God gives knowledge, but he gives it in slowly. And it's too slow for most people. It's too slow for Adam and Eve. They don't want to progress at that pace. And the serpent gives them a shortcut. It's like cheating on a test. You could learn the material and take the test, or you could get the answers. And they pursue the answers without understanding the questions. And that leads humanity into this devastating history where their technology outstrips their ethics. And that's what happens with the descendants of Cain. They're the most technologically advanced. They invent everything. They invent music, they invent metalworking, they invent weaponry, they invent everything. But they have no relationship with God and they destroy the earth. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Can you not see history repeating?
Yeah.
It's the same story. And yet we don't learn. It's not that Christians or anyone who follows God are against knowledge. We just believe character comes first. B'nai Hakma comes first. But the serpent will always offer you a quicker way to what you want to achieve. Always.
Yeah, it's like steroids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just watching this 30 for 30 on ESPN about Lance Armstrong.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Part one was like 2 hours long, so I had to watch it in little bits and pieces because of my time. But yeah, it was the same thing. He took this EPO, I think they called it, but it was the same. It's the same thing. Like, I can't compete with these people as I am, probably because they're all cheating. So I've got to do something to get myself up to that speed so I can compete. It's the same sort of thing. You know, human ambition is great. It keeps us learning and growing. It keeps us engaged. But at the same time, without God's wisdom, this knowledge will destroy us, and we're living into that in some ways.
Yeah.
You know.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's a very contemporary story, but we've gone a little bit longer maybe than I wanted to. But you know how I am when we start talking about the scriptures, Minister Joe.
Yeah.
It has an energy of itself. But do you want to? I mean, we didn't really get into how it all worked out, but we've been hinting at it throughout. I mean, the Eve, the woman who's actually not named Eve yet. She's not named until chapter 4.
Yeah,
she's just called the woman Haish.
woman.
The Hebrew is Haish. He's or I'm sorry, Isha is the woman, and he is Ish, the man. Ish and Isha. So she falls for it. She eats it. We find out that her husband was there. It says she gave some to her husband who was with her. So there's no traveling details. He doesn't come from anywhere. She doesn't go and find him. He's right there. And apparently watching the whole thing. I like to play around with why he didn't say anything. But if he thought it might be poisonous, he might have let her eat it first. I always joke around with that. But once he sees that it is very much the way the serpent said, he eats like that. There's no deliberation for him. He blames her for it, but he doesn't really argue with her, or try to dissuade her. He's just as interested as she is, like for the story. Though because she goes first, she gets cursed a little harsher. And for the first time, this hierarchical division exists in the male-female relationship. Every indication in the Hebrew is that they were equal prior to this. But after she steps out and makes this decision and he follows her, that relationship gets inverted and she is forced to follow him. And it's that, according to Genesis, is kind of the origins of the patriarchalism that we see in history. But the scriptures and the law of Moses, and then the example of the prophets, and then Jesus indicates that returning to the relationship they had prior to the fall is always the intention of God, which is more of equality. But there is a disparity that is part of the curse. We see that in chapter 3. Do you want to? Those are my kind of concluding comments. And the ground is cursed. There, you said that they were put here to till it. Well, now it's going to be hard to till, and Adam's labor now becomes oppressive rather than maybe it was a joy, or before it's no longer that. So, lots of things get disrupted. Serpent gets demoted from wild animal to creature that crawls along the ground. And then he and the woman are no longer allowed to be friends anymore. God puts enmity between them. So the reason Satan is against us now is God. He was working with us up until then, but God puts enmity. That's chapter 3, verse 15, between the woman and the serpent, and between their offspring. So the fact that the serpent is now an enemy is because God did that. I think for our good, though it may not always feel that way. Because you saw what was happening when we were working with him.
Right. Yeah.
So what are your concluding thoughts on this chapter?
Well, I mean, you can't overlook what she actually did. I mean, the question, it started with a question, pretty much a question who God is and whether he would be true to his word. And then it says that she saw the fruit of the tree and it was good for food and pleasing to the eye. So I think it's pretty important to bring that out, as well as that most temptations usually they start in the mind with a question. And then you get to a point where the temptation becomes more reality. It's a dwelling on it.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty clear there. That the eye is very vitally important to this ability to discern what is good, what is right.
Yeah,
Also says that,
she's drawn to that fruit, right? She's
yeah,
drawn to it.
yeah,
It's
desirable for,
appealing to her.
yeah, desirable for gaining wisdom. So she's definitely deceived by what this fruit can do for her.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Isn't that that's a great poll. I like that you found that.
mhm.
Yep.
And then she took it and brought it to her husband and gave some to her husband, and he ate it too. So I think that, and then it says both their eyes were open. They realized they were naked. The whole idea of innocence lost, the idea of vulnerability being
Yep.
lost. In other words, vulnerability was never an issue. Now it is,
Right.
and I think that also that burden of the curse for the woman as she always wants to be before. I think
Right.
that's a struggle that I think we deal with even in our culture with feminism, and it's probably a reaction to probably oppressive patriarchal clash too. But there's also that could be an issue too. That I think that people struggle with, and it becomes even harder to reconcile. But those are all elements that are here. I mean, you think about.
Yeah, I agree.
We talked about a little bit about Abraham and Sarah, and it's interesting that we talked about them in Hebrews about having a child.
Yep.
But it seemed like and I'm not being sexist or anything like that, but it seemed like the problem was really with Sarah.
Yeah.
That she was
Yeah.
barren.
Well, and of
But
course, let's be fair to Sarah. It was more of a miracle in her case.
yeah, have a
Abraham
child.
goes on to have other children after Sarah dies. So the infertility issue is not with him. And
Right.
it's not unusual, perhaps, for an older man to have children, but very unusual for an older woman to have
Right.
children naturally. So it was a harder thing for her to believe, perhaps, than Abram.
Mhm.
But yes, God points out that, yeah, that's why Isaac is named Isaac, because God didn't appreciate Sarah laughing.
Right. But those tension points that remain even after, I mean, are all things that have to be resolved in any relationship, let alone marriage.
Yeah.
So those are real evident here, and it wouldn't be right for us just to overlook them.
Yeah. And let
But
me just make this one caveat. In the verse where it says that it was desirable for attaining wisdom,
mm-hmm.
the actual word, though, is not wisdom. It's not chokmah. It's the word sakal, which means comprehension,
Mm-hmm.
insight. It can have to do with having success, becoming successful.
Mm-hmm.
So she sees that this tree, the knowledge has a purpose. Like the da'at will help her to comprehend things better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what she sees it desirable for, not for chokmah. I don't know why they translated it wise. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
you could, but it is a different word in Hebrew.
But even that whole concept of being able to have knowledge or be the arbitrary or the one who controls all knowledge sounds almost like a villain from a cartoon or something. I
It
have
is
all
funny, right?
knowledge.
Yeah. The villains always they want knowledge, they want power. But funny enough, in real life, that's true on both sides of the fence, good and bad.
Oh yeah.
And that's the funny thing about this tree. You can't get simply good knowledge without evil knowledge. And we should learn that lesson. They come together, which is why God is slow in revealing things to us. And he focuses more on our character and our maturity than he does in our raw knowledge. And the reason being is that knowledge, you can't pick and choose. Like you get the atom bomb, you get both realities. You get destructive power and helpful power. And it's the same with all knowledge. Like there's no neutral knowledge or knowledge that is purely good.
Mm-hmm.
And so how would we as a child race know when we're ready to know? Well, we wouldn't know that. Children never know when they're ready to know. It takes an adult, and that adult is God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a reason he didn't tell us the things he told us in Jesus. There's a reason he didn't tell us those things in Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
God progressively reveals, but humans want to know whenever we want to know. And that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I want to share this picture that I drew. I didn't draw it. I cobbled it together from other sources. But I used this at a sermon illustration once. You remember this?
I think so.
These are the two trees. So the tree of life turns out to be Jesus himself. That's his bread, his blood, and his body are what we eat to live, right? Faith in him becomes the tree of life. So the tree of life is a shadow in the First Testament of Jesus himself. The tree of knowledge, I have the brain here, because in some ways the tree of knowledge is a shadow of creation itself. So we talk a lot about shadow and reality in the book of Hebrews. The tree of knowledge, as real as it was, represented more than what it was. It was a shadow of creation. And you can extract knowledge from creation. You can reverse engineer the world and extract knowledge, but you can't extract wisdom and you can't extract understanding. You can extract simply knowledge, but it comes without context. Like, why can the atom be split? We know it can be split, but why? Well, only the Creator could tell us why that was built in. And the why is everything. That's the logos, the explanation. And you can't take that out of creation. So in some ways, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life are shadows of realities much bigger than themselves. They stand in for much bigger realities, not because they're myths. I think they're real, but they represent way more than themselves. The tree of life will end up representing Jesus and everything that life takes. The tree of knowledge will represent a pseudo kind of life, the kind of life you can take by stealing knowledge, but it's a tenuous life and you have to protect it all the time. You have to defend it from enemies. You have to protect it from evil. You have to, it's knowledge, as you can see now in the COVID-19, is used as a defense against the world. But that's because it's not real life. It's just da'at. If we could receive life from God and then learn as he enables us, we would receive more than the tree of knowledge could ever give us, but it would be slower. And we would not be autonomous. We would be dependent on God for our lives. Knowledge is the attempt to become autonomous by knowing. And that's the tree of knowledge. So I believe these are two historical trees.
Yep.
But they represent realities much larger than them. They are not simply trees. They are two entirely different sources of life. And I think that's important for us to know. And the serpent, of course, wants us to depend on the tree of knowledge because then we're vulnerable. Without God's protection, we are vulnerable and scared. And scared people are easy to control. So driving a wedge between us and God was really the intent. That was ultimately at the bottom of it. Everything else that it's about driving a wedge. And that worked. And so Jesus comes to reconcile us to God. So that's that. I don't think the scriptures want us to fear knowledge, but they want us to fear knowledge without character, without maturity, without. God is not interested in growing trees that grow too big for their roots. Because a tree that's too big for its roots, you and I lived in New Hampshire. We saw that happen all the time. We know what happens to those trees when the storms come.
Oh, yeah.
They topple right over, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so humanity has grown its brain far beyond its character. And that's devastating. That's why we keep destroying each other. We have more knowledge than we can really handle. And nobody wants to believe that, but that is, I think this story keeps playing out over and over again.
Yeah, that's why they say the Civil War was so bloody, is because the technology of the guns and ammunition were beyond their day. It was just so advanced. It was amazing how deadly the ability to kill people were.
Yeah.
With the types of technology that they were at.
We are viciously dangerous.
Mm.
You know, that's why I preached on this once before, that we should never wish success on our children, because the most devastating thing that can happen to our children is that they have success before they have character.
Mm.
It devastates lives. You know, you never wish for early fame or early success in your kids. For most people, that is devastatingly bad. It goes so terribly wrong for them.
Yeah.
And that's why in the church, we're about making disciples, not making geniuses.
Right.
This discipleship is about maturity. It's about the proper balance of da'at, knowledge, b'nai, discernment, chokmah, wisdom. You know, this is what growing up in the faith should be.
Mm-hmm.
But do you notice that oftentimes we in the church, we do focus mostly on da'at, mostly on content?
Mm-hmm.
Some of us are most interested that our kids come away knowing things rather than being things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what would it look like if we raised our children putting character and discernment before knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a different world, but a much more difficult one, because it takes mentoring, it takes time to help someone with discernment and with wisdom. Knowledge can be delivered in a lecture.
Yep.
And that's why we focused on it. It's the only thing you can pass on without much cost to yourself.
Right.
The only thing that it costs you to pass on knowledge is time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just time and energy. But to pass on the things that matter, you have to give all of yourself
Mm-hmm.
to the process.
Investment.
Yeah. And so it's no wonder that we have, just like our ancestors, decided that knowledge is enough. But now we're living into a world where our knowledge so far exceeds our character,
mm-hmm.
that the consequences of what we know surprise us constantly.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah, it's a timely story.
Yep.
So where do we go from here, Minister Joe? What do you sense people should learn from this? How would they live differently?
Well, we're certainly not going to clothe ourselves with fig leaves. We're going to clothe ourselves with and then for somebody who thought they were going to get smarter, they weren't too smart doing that.
Well, their instinct was to hide.
Yeah,
they wanted to hide from God, and that is the instinct of people. Even in the book of Revelation, when the plagues start to come, everybody wants to hide from God.
That's right. Let us hide underneath the rocks.
Yeah,
we talked about one of our other times.
The rocks in Revelation are fig leaves in Genesis 3.
Mm-hmm.
They want to hide from God and from each other. That's what knowledge without character does. It makes you afraid.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened with COVID-19, right? Everybody's a panic because we know how dangerous this is, but we don't know how to control it. We don't have any discernment or wisdom. We have no idea what to do. But we do know how dangerous it is. And that's what creates fear.
Mm-hmm.
And fear is a healthy response to dangers.
Oh, yeah.
What would our world look like today if we had been in relationship with God for the last however many thousands of years?
Mm.
You know, we keep eating from the tree of knowledge. Even Christians, we keep thinking knowledge is power.